This is RetRead Podcast.
We take a deep dive into the Fear Street series
And review other books we've read.
I'm Serge.
And I'm Anna.
We're happy you can join us. Hey guys, welcome back to another exciting episode of RetRead Podcast. We're back.
Hey there, I'm back in America.
Yeah, if you guys are following our Instagram, we are posting photographs of all of the wonderful bookstores that Anna has visited on her sojourn in the United Kingdom.
They take their bookstores really seriously there.
We noticed that our feed has had a lot of bookstore photographs recently, so we figured might as well continue that trend. I think we're gonna just keep posting bookstore photos, because why not? Everybody loves bookstores. I love bookstores.
Well, first of all, you're pretty behind on the bookstore posting, so I'm pretty sure even after this episode comes out, you'll still be posting bookstore pictures that I took. But I have to say, the British Library. I went to a ton of museums when I was in the UK. I was in London, Sheffield, York, Edinburgh, Glasgow. I went to a bunch of places, a bunch of museums. And I've done a lot of traveling, and I've gone to museums all over the world. I have to say, the British Library was something that truly surprised me. Their collection is second to none. It's amazing what they have. And you never really think about going to a library. If we didn't have RetRead Podcast and I wasn't such a bibliophile, I wouldn't have gone there. And I would have missed out on their amazing treasures.
Did you get a library card?
No.
So it's not like Brooklyn Public Library, where as long as you're a resident of this planet, you can get a library card there?
You have to be a resident of New York State?
Well, you know.
So if you ever find yourself in London, if you ever find yourself at King's Cross, St. Pancras, head over to the library. It's right next to that station, and you're going to have an amazing time. They have exhibitions all over the place. They have that are free. They have a paying exhibition. So what was on when I was there was their Anglo-Saxon exhibit, and then they have their treasures collection. And it's just amazing. You could spend an entire day at the library.
And just to be clear, you don't need to have a library card to see all of these things?
No, you don't.
Okay, wow. That's cool.
You do need a library card to see their books, a lot of their books, in their reading rooms.
Oh, right.
But I think you can just get one. I think you can just go downstairs and get yourself a reading card or something. And then you can go through their map collections.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was really, really cool. But even the bookstores, I went to I didn't really go to Waterstones. I think I went to Waterstones, which is basically their Barnes & Noble, I would say. My hotel in Glasgow is right next to the Waterstones in Glasgow, so I obviously went to it a few times just to get Wi-Fi. But their used bookstores, not just in Glasgow, but just in general, they are amazing. And in fact, I feel like all the used bookstores that I went to have been better than some of the used bookstores that I've been to in Brooklyn. There is one chain of used bookstores that I would tell everyone to go to, and that's the Oxfam bookstores. They're actually this charity. I've heard of Oxfam, the charity, but I didn't know that their stores were used bookstores. Based on what I understand of Oxfam, all the money they make from the bookstores, the used bookstores, it goes to all their charity work, and they do a lot of amazing work. Their used bookstores are really amazing. And yeah, I did end up buying some stuff, but it's good to be home.
So one of the things you noticed in the UK was that they have a lot of Enid Blyton books over there. And we'd never heard of these until we talked to Edgar Cantero a couple weeks back, and we were like,
who is Enid Blyton?
Right, exactly.
But literally every single bookstore I went to, I think I sent you pictures of just her books.
Yeah, Enid Blyton everywhere. Left, Enid Blyton right, even Blyton above,
what's hilarious
Enid Blyton below.
Is that my last night in London, I went out for dinner, and as I'm eating these delicious dumplings, the people sitting at the table next to me are having a spirited discussion on Enid Blyton.
That's really amazing, because it's like that thing, when you first hear about something, suddenly you start noticing it everywhere, right? And then this is kind of
It's like the yellow Jeep thing that you learn in every single intro to psych course, right?
Yeah.
In Psych 101, they always talk about, the yellow Jeep phenomenon. Like, count the number of yellow Jeep you see before the next class. And, like, before that, you've, like, never seen any yellow Jeeps. And then after that, you see, like, yellow Jeeps all over the place. We never heard of Enid Blyton, but all of a sudden, it was Enid Blyton everywhere. Everyone's talking about Enid Blyton. Even, like, another book podcast.
Maybe there's, like, an Enid Blyton revival, which is interesting, given that, based on what Edgar Cantero told us, she is a raging racist.
Well, the thing is, on the other podcast, and also the couple that was next to me in London, their whole thing was like, yeah, she's really racist, and they would not stand the test of, like, today. So, everyone's consensus is, yeah, her books are super racist, but everyone knew her. She was in every single used bookstore. I guess everyone read her. We
first learned about Enid Blyton from Edgar Cantero, who explained to us that his pitch for Meddling Kids was Enid Blyton meets Cthulhu. He pitched this to his American publisher, and they were like,
Who's Enid Blyton?
Yeah, exactly. Gesundheit. And he was like, oh, right, America. Scooby-Doo meets Cthulhu. And they're like, oh, yeah, all right, we'll pay you money for that.
Before he got that book out, he actually wrote another book. It was called Supernatural Enhancements, right?
Right, exactly. That's how how did he get his foot in the door with all those American publishers? So I read this book. You gotta think about it. I read Meddling Kids, loved it. Read his latest novel, This Body's Not Big Enough for the Both of Us. Loved that. Both 5-star reviews. Okay, well, I gotta go. He's got one last remaining English novel, right? English language novel, and that's the Supernatural Enhancements. It was published prior to Meddling Kids, and I wanted to give it a shot. So I read that book, and guess what? Some of you may be surprised to hear that I loved it. 5 stars. Great book.
How surprising.
This one is interesting. It's an epistolary novel, which means that everything in the novel is related in the form of transcripts, of video recordings, or letters written by one of the characters, or transcript of audio recordings, or written notes made by the characters in the book. Nothing is actually narrated by some kind of omniscient narrator or by one of the characters in the moment, which is kind of an interesting take on that. If you want to know more about how this came about, listen to our interview with Edgar Cantero, which was one of the previous episodes. I don't want to spoil too much about this book because it's a mystery, and as you learn more and more, the mystery kind of opens up. So for every question that gets answered in the mystery, you discover that there are about 10 other questions that you'd love to have the answer to. And then maybe one of those is answered, and then there's 10 more questions asked simply by knowing the answer to that one. And this thing just opens up so wide. At the end of the book, you get the answer to a couple of the most pressing questions you have, and then you get about 1,000 more questions in your head going OMG. I would say this is the one novel of his that is just crying out in the wilderness, just screaming for a sequel. If you want to know what the prospects are for a sequel to this novel, you can also listen to our interview with Edgar Cantero, which we recorded previously. But yeah, I love this book. It was great. There was one little bit of a problematic part to it, though, which was the romantic relationship in the book. I took it in stride, but I can see how it's not super kosher. You read this book too, Anna. I mean, what would you say about it?
I mean, obviously there was interest in both parties.
Yeah.
But I don't think they actually ever executed any relationship type things.
Well, there was that one letter to the aunt where it was I thought it was implied. The implication is there for the reader to make, and therefore maybe it says more about me than the letter itself. That's what I inferred from the text.
I mean, that's valid. I feel like he didn't straight out have them say anything.
And that's the beauty of the epistolary format, is that you can't, unless there's literally a camera pointed right at the thing.
Or a damning diary entry.
Exactly.
I could see how someone could interpret it and have an issue with it. And it's a bit of a thing.
But the interesting thing about this is, and once again, I will plug our interview with Edgar Cantero, but he has an interesting explanation for why the female character's age is what it is in this book.
Are you just plugging our interview?
Am I plugging the interview a little too much? I was so excited to have the opportunity to speak with Edgar. It was a great honor. I feel like I learned so much as a fan of his books. just seeing how all the pieces fit together was really amazing. And that's one of the great things about having this book podcast with you, is that the 3 authors we've interviewed so far, each one has been such an amazing privilege to actually read books by somebody and then get to talk to them about it. Just have a conversation like, hey, when you wrote this, what were you thinking? What came into your mind that made you write that? It's really a privilege. And I'm also honored to share that with all of you, our listeners, because I think that is something special.
Yeah,
and hopefully
really
we
cool.
get another angle on it than some more traditional interviewers.
Hopefully. And I hope, our listeners do get something from it. And I hope Edgar had fun. That's the most important thing. Yeah, I did read this book as well. I think I'm still chasing the high of Meddling Kids. I think that sets such a high bar for my expectations for Edgar's books that maybe I didn't enjoy this book as much as I could have had I not read Meddling Kids. I think it set an unfair high bar because I thought Meddling Kids was just the perfect book. And also, I think epistolary novels, it's already difficult to get people invested because there is this sort of extra layer between the reader and the characters, whereas you don't quite get something like that reading it from third person or first person or even second person. It is a little different, and I think that it takes an extra bit just to get invested, but he did do a good job. Unlike something like House of Leaves, where you sort of end up just picking one storyline or picking one point of view, or like, I'm only going to read the video, transcripts or the diary entries or whatever. Like for this book, it was like, okay, I'll read everything. That's an accomplishment in itself when you're writing an epistolary novel. You're right, it's not a good book to spoil, so like, it's really hard to talk about. But yeah, it's fun.
If you tried House of Leaves and weren't really sure what to make of it, you might like this book a little bit more. It's another haunted house book. At its core, at least for me, House of Leaves was a haunted house book. I know there's other aspects to it that other people took away, but for me, I focused on that aspect of it, and I found this book to resemble it in certain ways, and I did enjoy those aspects. That's a 5 stars from me. Highly recommended. If you love Meddling Kids, if you went on to read This Body's Not Big Enough for the Both of Us, do yourself a treat. Head to the bookstore, pick up this book.
Or the library.
Yes, support your local library and check it out. This is his first novel published in English, and it is quite something, I promise you.
Well, I guess going on with things that connect to my trip to the UK. During my trip, I had gone to Edinburgh and London. I was actually reading a book, actually on the plane back from my trip. It's called The Lady's Guide to Petticoats and Piracy. And the first chapter of this book takes place in Edinburgh, just like down the street from where I was like walking around. And then another portion of the book takes place in London. Not really where I was around, but still pretty cool. And then the rest of it like takes place not in those 2 places. But yeah, so Lady's Guide to Petticoats and Piracy by Mackenzi Lee.
Yeah, some of you may remember Mackenzi Lee from last summer's must-read YA novel,
The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue. So this is the sequel to that. It takes place 1 year later. I know a lot of people really, really love Gentleman's Guide, but I thought it was okay. I started my review with like #rich people problems because it was basically the story of Monty, who is going to have to eventually grow up, take over the family business, amass the family fortune, and be like a mature, functioning part of society, whereas normally he's just drunk out of his mind and high on drugs and he really reminded me of Logan Huntsberger from Gilmore Girls. The main difference being that he is gay in the 1700s. But there's like, it's just reeking of privilege in so many ways that it's very hard to just, I guess, really empathize, because at the end of the day, he was causing many of his own problems by drinking everything away and by just bemoaning the fact that, oh, I'm rich. Oh, I have to like deal with all my like wealth and immense privilege, and it really sucks. And I feel like in this day and age, it's not really a message that resonates with people.
Nope.
But I think a lot of people really enjoy the book because it is fun. A lot of people like the character of Logan Huntsberger from Gilmore Girls. There's just an element of carefreeness that he has that is fun to read about. But when you really think about it, it's like very hard to engage with. And I think I'm just like old and stodgy or something, because I was just like, I don't really like this Monty character, and I thought his boyfriend Percy deserved a lot better than him. But Lady's Guide, I feel like is a little different. It's the story of his sister Felicity. It's a year after The Gentleman's Guide. They no longer have their family fortune. They've basically left their family. They've left the privilege. They left the wealth. I'm pretty sure like even Monty's story would be more interesting this time around. It's sort of like, almost like Lorelai Gilmore, how she gave up the entire Gilmore fortune to like do her own thing. Except, obviously, the story is different because Felicity's dream is to be a doctor. She wants to go to medical school, she wants to get a license, and she wants to be able to practice. Except in 1700s, women aren't allowed to go to medical school. They're not allowed to go to school in general. They can go to finishing school, and then they can become a wife, and then they can have kids. Their brains are deemed too delicate and simple to handle complex things. What makes this book more interesting to me than the previous book is that it's not about someone pissing away their privilege or standing up to the man because they don't want to deal with responsibility. It's about someone just trying to get a seat at the table. It's about someone who just wants to be seen as an equal and fighting for their chance, doing everything they can just to get a chance to be seen as an equal. And like the entire time they're just being mocked and they're just being told, you're not good enough. You're not good enough because you're a woman. You're not going to get this chance because you're a woman. You're inferior to us because you're a woman. And I feel like having to fight your way to get something is a lot more compelling a story than fighting against everything that's given to you.
Yep, that makes sense to me. You know, the one would resonate more with me than the other one.
So the plot of this story is basically Felicity has spent the year trying to get into the Edinburgh Medical School, Medical Society, and she's been turned down. She goes to London and she's been turned down. There's a dude that really wants to marry her and she's just not interested in his overtures. She's not interested in this relationship in general. She just wants her goal in life. She just wants to be a doctor. But when she's in London, after like a whole meltdown in the London Medical Society, she gets a tip that her idol, Alexander Platt, is going on an expedition. And he gives her a note and says, give this note to him. And it basically says that, yeah, I recommend this girl to be a member of your expedition. Like, she's good. She's legit. She knows her shit. She's not going to get a chance here, but like, maybe you can help her. But the thing is, she has to go to Alexander Platt before he goes on his expedition. And right before he goes on his expedition, he's getting married. So she basically needs to crash his wedding. And he happens to be getting married to her former best friend. But she and her former best friend had like this massive falling out. They were like no longer on speaking terms. So that's an issue. And also she actually needs to get to his wedding, which is going to be in Stuttgart. And she's in London. She has no money. And she has no way of getting there. So she needs to find a way to get to this wedding, to get into the wedding, to talk to the guy, and to get him to get her on the expedition.
Can I just interrupt you really quickly here? Are you giving away the entire plot of the book at this point?
No.
Okay. Because I'm pretty hooked. I'm actually pretty hooked. I'm like wrapped with attention here, just trying to like figure out, oh my god, what's going to happen next?
No, that's like the blurb I'll give. Because obviously like plot happens and it's amazing. I really had a lot of fun with this book. I do feel in a lot of ways it is a lady's guide. There's multiple female characters who have roles in this book. And they basically show you that there's no one way to be a lady. There's no such thing as something that makes you a real lady. Like Felicity is someone who hates parties, she hates makeup, she hates putting on frilly dresses, and she thinks anyone who does that is just wasting their time, they're just making themselves look appealing to men. You know, it's just a way to put women down, and being a girly girl is just a waste of time and just beneath her. And then you have someone like Joanna. They had a falling out because, like, she told Joanna, like, listen, you're just trying to fit in, you're just a fake, you're too good for that stuff. My way to be a doctor and focusing on what's important, that's, like, the one thing that we should do. And Joanna was like, you know what? She likes frilly stuff, she likes wearing dresses, she likes putting makeup on, she likes being a girly girl, because that's just what she likes, but it doesn't make her less of a person. And then there's another character who's a female pirate, and she's different from the other two characters, but it's just the three of them showcase like three different ideals, I would say, that people have of women. And it doesn't say that one is better than the other. It just says that there's many ways that you can go about it. And in many ways, this is like a literary feminist empowerment anthem. A book just embracing womanhood. And I really, really thought it was like really powerful in a way that I felt Gentleman's Guide was just fluffy and vapid. Like I felt this book really resonated, especially in the world we're living in.
Wow, that's powerful. And looking around on YouTube, on the Podmosphere today, and then comparing to what we had in summer of 2017, where people could not get enough of Gentleman's Guide. I mean, there were early review copies dropping in every booktuber's mailbox. People were freaking out about it months before the publishing date. Reviews were up. Everybody was freaking out about this thing. It was in everyone's owl crate. And then fast forward to October 2018, and it's like freaking crickets for this book, which, from what I've heard, based on my conversations with you and what you just said right now, is a step above.
I think it's a step above. I did read the reviews, like some Goodreads review. And I do think, like, if you really loved the fun and sort of carefreeness that Monty had, you might not like this book as much. Felicity is a very different character. She's very single-track minded. She wants to be a doctor. She wants to be seen as more than a woman. She has specific points of views that people might not like how rigid she is. She's very rigid, in the same way that Monty was very selfish, but that selfishness comes out in a very fun, carefree way. And Felicity is quite the opposite of carefreeness. And also, Gentleman's Guide, at its heart, is kind of a love story between Monty and Percy. Whereas there's no love story here, it's a friendship story. It's a book about friendship and the importance of friendship and the bonds of friendship. It's two different books, and I can see how one is easier to market than the other.
But on the one hand, like, just to play devil's advocate with that, doesn't friendship basically have a more global appeal than romance?
You know, what's interesting is I read a lot of YA books because they're easy to read. They're quick reads. And sometimes you just need a quick read, because I read a lot of like really heavy books. And sometimes between, the different nonfiction books, between literary fiction books, you just want like a book to clear your mind.
Oh, just like eating like a little chunk of wasabi in between two bits of sushi.
Right, except maybe more pleasurable. And one thing that I don't get about YA books is a lot of YA books just have a romance that is usually the weakest part of the story. So I read a book by Emma Mills called Foolish Hearts. That was a story that there's going to be a love story there. But the most important parts, the strongest parts for me, were the parts about the friendships. The friendship she was making, the friendship she was losing,
sure.
The friendships. To me, it was like, okay, the love story is okay here. It's one of the better YA love stories. And it was marketed more about the love interest in her. But like, so many YA books would do so much better if they just focused more on the friendships. I feel like, for some reason, YA books really feel the need to focus on love stories and love interests. And I guess the good part of Felicity being asexual or aromantic is that is not something that can really be focused on. It is the friendship element that can be focused on. And maybe just people aren't interested in that. People just want love stories. I'm not sure.
Right. I mean, like, what role does marketing have to play in this? Is the publishing industry not willing to market something that doesn't have that cookie cutter, preordained outline of a YA novel, which includes a romance? It's like, oh, this thing has no romance. We're not sure what to do with this. We'll publish it because it's a sequel, but I don't know if we're going to put it in an owl crate. That's the thing. Like, is this book being discriminated against because it's trying to be something a little bit different from your cookie cutter YA novel, with fill in the blanks? This is the blank outline form that you have to make.
I'm not a member of like any sort of YA book community. I'm not a publisher. I don't necessarily know how that works. All I can tell you is from the books that I have read and from what I see, I've just made a bunch of assumptions. I'll say that like I haven't really seen much of this book out there. And I remember when Gentleman's Guide came out, I do subscribe to a lot of booktubers. So I do try to see like what's being reviewed and what people are talking about and like, is this a book I should be reading? Is this a book I should whatever? But I do know that I had met Mackenzi Lee at BookCon Book Expo and I was like, okay, I want to read her next book.
Yeah.
Even though I wasn't blown away by Gentleman's Guide,
sure.
Like something about her made me want to read this book. And I thought it was kind of weird that like no one was really talking about it, but because I was like traveling, I didn't really, you don't really YouTube that much when you're traveling.
No, you're completely right. I remember last summer, this stuff was blowing up. Everybody was Gentleman's Guide. I mean, like, an unnamed booktuber gushed about how they had two different copies of the book with slightly different covers, and they weren't sure which one to give away and which one to keep because maybe they wanted both of them because, oh my god, this is such a great book. And at that point in time, I'm not even sure that they had read either copy. They were just so hyped up about this book. And this is not the kind of hype we're seeing about this follow-up sequel. And I'm just like a little concerned because I have not read either one. But from what I'm hearing, the second one's better and it's getting like almost no attention.
I mean, it's better to me, but my taste is not necessarily the same as everyone else's taste, right? I think it's the whole pissing away privilege thing that like really rankles me. I feel like Ladies' Guide is more, like I said, it's like a feminist empowerment thing. Felicity does complain about how awful men are at times, how awful it is to be a woman during this time period, how awful it is that she like constantly needs a leg up. She has a very snarky sense of humor, but she's also like very analytical and I would say like almost robotic. And I can see how that's off-putting to some readers. Like some people just want a reader that they can relate to completely, that they could either be or be best friends with. And Felicity might not be that person. Whereas Monty is someone that like you would hang with. So I can see why some people like Gentleman's Guide, and I can see the hype for Gentleman's Guide. But I do think that the publisher hasn't been pushing this. I am curious as to why, because I don't want to get too political, but this is a very female empowerment, women period that we're living in. And I would have loved to see this get a lot more publicity than it's getting. I mean, it didn't get 5 stars from me. It only got like 4 stars because some elements at the end, I was like, it's kind of forgettable.
Right, but on the balance, it's better than the 3 stars you gave Gentleman's Guide.
Yeah, I think I gave Gentleman's Guide 3.25, which rounds to 3.
Exactly. So you would expect that, okay, maybe this one would be getting at least a little bit more attention.
Half as much attention, yeah.
Get out there and read it, folks. If you like Gentleman's Guide, then you owe it to yourself to read this one. And if you didn't like Gentleman's Guide, maybe you'll like this one better.
Good call.
So speaking of Gentleman's Guide, we actually had the great pleasure of meeting Mackenzi Lee at this year's BookCon and Book Expo. And we managed to get a signed copy of Gentleman's Guide made out to RetReaders. So RetReaders who are listening out there, we will be raffling this book off in a Twitter giveaway in the month of November.
So keep your eyes peeled for that.
Get excited.
If you like reading about like mediocre white males who are overly privileged, think so highly of themselves that they get everything, then you should stick around to our review of Fear Street Saga, The Burning.
After this intermission. And we're back.
So let's talk about Fear Street Saga, The Burning, the last book in this Fear Street Saga trilogy.
Right, can I just say, thank God it's finally over.
Well, let's talk about the book first. So what was our predictions and how'd we do?
We can start with my predictions. Looking at the cover, I thought that the woman depicted on the cover is Nora Goode, and that she ends up marrying one of the Fiers. And this actually ended up being correct. We already knew that from we knew that from book 1. The house burst into flames on her wedding day.
Yes, you also find that out.
Okay. I said that someone will get stabbed with a dagger. I think that was correct, right? Somebody got stabbed. Fear daughters.
Well, with a sword.
Well, I got the implement length wrong, but the general gist of it I got right. And a ghost will visit a female relative. There's a lot of ghosts at the party? Is that right? A bunch of people die by fire. Yep, that's true. And a female murderer, and somehow Nora Goode is to blame. No. Nora Goode is blameless, although there is a female murderer earlier in the book, in the first half. I think I was pretty much completely correct, except Nora Goode is completely blameless in all of this.
So I said this book would be the story of Simon Fear's love and the eventual burning down of the Fier mansion. I said the deaths involve Simon's daughters and Nora Goode's Fier love interest.
Yep.
I said the daughter's death will be supernatural.
Okay.
A little bit. There's some wiggle room there, I guess. Yep. And that Nora's hubby's death will be fire.
Yep.
And I said the murderer will be a female via some supernatural element.
Yeah, so that last one, again, that applies the same way my female murderer prediction applied, so it's 100% correct.
What was this long-winded book about?
Well, basically, we're going to follow Simon Fier from his days as a pickup artist in New Orleans all the way down to his death many years later in his burning mansion. How he didn't need a curse to destroy his own family. because all of his troubles are kind of self-made.
So the characters, obviously we have the Goodes and the Fiers, right? So for the Goodes, we have Lucy Goode in 1865, and we have Nora Goode in the 1900s, and her father, James Goode.
And then we have the Fier family, obviously Simon Fier, who we've heard so much about in all the books leading up to this, not just the saga. And we finally get to learn about his life. Then there's his wife, Angelica Fier.
I thought it was Angelica.
Okay, Angelica Fier.
Well, I just assumed it's Angelica because that's the Angelica from Rugrats.
And we have her dad, Henry Pierce, and her cousin, Liza Dupree. Then we have the children of Simon and Angelica. In 1865, Julia is 17 years old, Hannah is 16, Robert is 14, Brandon is 11, and Joseph is 5 years old. And then finally, in the year 1900, we have Daniel Fier, who is Joseph's son, and he's 18 in 1900.
So the book starts out in New Orleans in 1845, and Simon Fier is trolling for society girls. It's Mardi Gras, and the city is full of parties.
So he manages to sneak into Angelica Pierce's debutante ball without an invitation. It's the most exclusive party and the best place to help him climb the social ladder.
Even though Simon's clothing is frayed and he doesn't look as rich as everyone else, his ego calms him down and gets him into the party. But no one actually gives him the time of day, which actually enrages him. It's kind of hilarious.
Yeah, girls walk away from him as he speaks, and girls who end up dancing with him don't even look at him.
But he does manage to catch Angelica Pierce's eye. But then he gets kicked out before they even get a chance to speak.
Some servants have been looking for him the entire time because they kind of saw that he snuck in without an invite. But he blended in with the crowd. They finally managed to track him down. They kind of haul him off.
And then you switch point of views to Angelica and Liza, and they're actually gossiping about the partygoers.
Angelica is immediately drawn to Simon Fier's eyes, whereas Liza makes fun of how poor he looks.
Obviously, the two of them come from very wealthy families. So the two of them talk about Angelica's two other suitors. They are two of the best-looking, wealthiest young men in New Orleans. And she actually has to marry one of them soon because she's of age.
Tick-tock, tick-tock. First of all, we have James Daumier, a toothy guy who grins too much. And he's tall with broad shoulders and intense silver-gray eyes beneath white blonde hair. He likes talking about fashion and friends. He's charming with a mischievous sense of humor.
Next up, we've got Hamilton Scott. He has curly red hair and a face full of freckles. He's serious with strong political leanings, and he actually likes lecturing on the morality of slavery and trade policies of the French. He's very intelligent and caring.
Angelica dances with both James and Hamilton, but can't shake Simon out of her mind. After the party, Angelica goes to think about the evening.
So Simon breaks into her backyard and proposes to Angelica. This is literally their first conversation, and he says that, "You're gonna marry me."
He's been spying on her after being thrown out of the party.
So Angelica is freaked out by him and asks him to leave, which is very reasonable, I think.
And Simon's parting words are, "You will marry me, Angelica Pierce. Mark my words." In this party, you get Simon's internal monologue, and basically he's got this pickup artist mentality where he's
looking for the perfect woman, and then anyone who won't give him the time of day, he just thinks, well, you're beneath me.
He's just doing that thing where you're just trying to manipulate other people to like you, but inside you're not the person that you're putting the face on of.
Well, I feel like everyone kind of does that at parties, but he takes it to a level where he thinks that if anyone rejects him in any way, shape, or form, it's them who has the issue, and he's just perfect, and everything about him is amazing. Well, and he has this air of arrogance about him.
Well, he's like the poster child of toxic masculinity.
Simon Fier is very unimpressive to me.
Yeah.
After, telling Angelica that they're going to get married, he's just wandering the streets super high from this encounter, and someone tries to rob him.
This does not go well for the thief. Simon reacts by cutting the thief's face with the pendant. Remember the claw pendant with that green stone and that curse written on the back of it? Yeah, he's still wearing that. And the jewel makes a small puncture, I guess from those claws, on the thief's face.
Well, the man's face begins to burn, and then it blisters. And then the blisters pop and seep, and then the skin melts off, exposing bone. And then a gray skull remains, and the body crumbles.
So Simon realizes that he has the power to do whatever he wants and get whatever he wants. And what he wants is Angelica Pierce, and to get rid of the obstacles between them. So I guess this is where he learns the true power of the stone.
Yes, liberate tutame or something like that. Anyways, so Angelica, Liza, and James are at the opera, and there's a lot of gossiping and inane chit-chat.
Angelica thinks about the dates she's been on with both James and Hamilton since Mardi Gras, and also about Simon, who's come calling twice.
Well, speaking of Simon, who's in the opera box below them?
Yeah, he shows up.
So Angelica and Liza look down. There's a brief conversation like, oh my god, isn't that Simon kid that was at the party? And, James' interest is piqued. Like, who is this random guy that both girls seem to know?
Yeah, so he's curiously peering over the railing to get a better look at Simon below him. And then, as if he's being controlled by some other force, James climbs up onto the railing, kind of just falls to his death.
So Simon Fier, after neatly tucking his pendant away, goes up to comfort Angelica. What a nice guy.
Right. Yeah, nice guy is the right description here. He's a quote-unquote nice guy.
After James's funeral, Angelica and her father talk about the funeral and how Hamilton will be a great match for Angelica since James is dead and all.
And basically, her decision's been made for her. Oh, joy.
So Angelica and Liza talk about it, and we find out that Angelica's kind of into Simon Fier. And Liza finds this deeply disturbing because Simon's a poor northerner.
I mean, I'm not sure which sin is worse, being poor or being a northerner, but 2 strikes against them right there.
Well, right on cue, Hamilton shows up, while Simon is creeping around outside spying on them and deciding that, yeah, it's Hamilton's turn to die.
So a month later, Angelica, Liza, and Hamilton are seeing Aunt Lavinia off. She's actually taking a paddle wheel boat from New Orleans back to Memphis.
So the 3 of them decide to go to a closed-off pier to get a closer view of the boat pulling away, because it's kind of cool, and they want to get, a nice view of it.
Even though the pier is, off limits, but whatever. What could
they're
go wrong?
Rich and privileged, right? So the girls catch sight of Simon Fier in the crowd, and he's holding this pendant up high, and it's kind of weird, but...
And Hamilton's suddenly in the water. How did that happen?
Well, he's caught up in the paddle of the boat, and he's just being crushed by the paddle into the boat, into the water, back into the boat, into the water.
Yeah, and then the water's, turning into this, pink foam as his, blood just kind of gets mixed in everywhere. And his ragdoll limp body's just getting mangled beyond recognition.
Well, no worries, because here's Simon comforting Angelica.
Who was surprised by that? Were you surprised by that?
How surprising.
So the story's kind of progressing right along like we might expect. 2 months later, Angelica is done mourning for Hamilton, and her father wants her to take a trip abroad now that Liza has returned home to Virginia, and also to stay away from Simon Fier because he sees what's going on and he doesn't like one bit of it.
I think it's great that he gives her 2 months to mourn for Hamilton, but right after the funeral for James, it's well, he's dead. Gotta get married to Hamilton.
Right, but after both of those are dead, there's not really much else for her to do since there's no other eligible bachelors, I guess.
Well, Mr. Pierce goes to rest, and guess who shows up?
Simon comes to visit.
And Angelica accepts his marriage proposal.
Okay, so this scene is so weird, right? First of all, he shows up, he's like, let's get married. She's like, absolutely. And so they decide to toast their engagement. They break out the wine glasses or whatever.
As they're toasting, Simon has a little secret to reveal.
Yeah, he's like, actually, I gotta tell you, I'm the one that killed James and Hamilton by using, my super magical powers.
So Angelica starts probing him a little, just to get him to tell her what his powers are.
He tells her about the pendant and the dominatio per malum and the whatever. And she actually cries out with laughter and reveals that, you got no powers, man. Actually, she's the one that's been practicing dark arts since she was a child.
She knew at the party that she and Simon were destined to be together. So she set off to dispatch the obstacles, as they are.
The other 2 suitors were far too innocent and lacking in evil, to be suitable for her.
Well, Simon is super excited. He's like, well, let's go tell your dad. And he runs off to go to Mr. Pierce's room.
And they find out that Mr. Pierce is dead. And Simon's like, well, I might not have killed your 2 suitors, but guess what? I just killed your dad. Yep, that was me. I poisoned him. And she's just ecstatic. She's like, yes!
We can be married and wealthy.
Yeah, a match made in hell. And then they toast with blood.
Yes, it's a great scene where Simon's like, this isn't wine, is it? She's like, no, it's blood. And they clink and drink, and it's like, whatever.
I don't know if it's a great scene. I want to say it's kind of a stupid scene. I was facepalming as I read it. I'm like, they're toasting with blood, really?
So, fast forward, Shadyside Village, 1865. The Fiers are the richest people in the village.
Yeah, this kind of like ties back to the first book where the Fiers are the richest people in the village. Seems to be like a theme. It's like poetry, it rhymes, right?
Calm down, George Lucas. So Simon Fier is getting ready to host a dinner party with the most prominent people in town.
The thing is, like, he needs a little bit of help from his daughters to host the party.
And he's making, like, a seating plan, so each daughter has to sit next to someone, right?
And it turns out that he's been treating his elder daughter, Julia, like crap because she doesn't live up to what he expects from his progeny. She looks too plain. Her personality is boring. She only shows excitement about anything when she's at the potter's wheel, according to Simon. He has her sitting next to a boring old guest who's also partially deaf.
When she complains to Simon about it, you're making me sit next to this deaf guy. We can't have a conversation. Can I just please sit next to someone interesting? And he's like, well, someone like you should only sit next to someone who can't hear you.
Because she's boring and a wet towel at parties. So then we have his second daughter, Hannah, and she is actually given the honor of sitting next to the most important guest.
She's beautiful and charming. She has an outgoing personality. She can just keep conversations going, and she's absolutely delightful. Everyone loves her.
So as Julia is arguing about her unfair treatment, the argument is actually diffused by the introduction of the new maid, Lucy, who's going to start cleaning for the party. Everyone else leaves to do their own thing, and you find out that Lucy is actually a Goode, a fact that the head maid tells her to hide.
So Simon goes upstairs, and then he finds that Angelica's on the ground. She's passed out, and it's because she was communicating with the spirits. She's actually lost the ability to control her trances and the dark arts.
She refuses to attend the party because the cards told her to avoid celebrations for the whole day.
And this brings things right back to the whole party. Because Angelica's not going to the party, Hannah is now the main hostess, which makes Julia even more upset because she's the eldest daughter.
Yeah, how unfair is that? So anyway, during the party, Lucy, the new maid, accidentally spills soup on Julia and burns her with a soup tureen. And weirdly, there's this smile on Lucy's face as this happens. Well, at least according to Julia, there is.
Well, when Julia goes up to clean herself off, Simon Fier is just giving her a look of distaste, like you've ruined the party.
So now Julia and Hannah are on alert about Lucy. You know, something doesn't seem right about her.
Well, that night before bed, Hannah sees Lucy coming out of her room, and she thinks it's weird, but there's probably not much more to that.
Except now there's a snake in her bed, and she freaks out. Everybody blames one of the brothers, but she's starting to think like, okay, wait a minute, this is not adding up.
Getting ready for dinner the next day, Hannah was putting on her shoes, and all of a sudden, her foot is all cut up because someone had put glass shards in her shoe.
Since Lucy had cleaned her room earlier that day, Hannah is super suspicious of her.
So the Fier children have an afternoon picnic a few days later. They walk by the family cemetery, which is a new burial plot dug up for the gardener. His funeral is actually in a few hours.
You know, that's weird, right? Because they just moved into town, and who's going to be buried in their family cemetery? Did they just designate a place to be the family cemetery, and then there's just this one grave for the gardener? The gardener's, his funeral is going to be in a few hours, but in the meantime, there's just this, like, open grave just chilling there.
I think his coffin is there, too.
Yeah, and they just decide to, you know what, why don't we just picnic right here next to the open grave, the coffin, you know.
To be fair, they walk past it into the woods.
Well, yeah, I mean, but I think they're still inside of it. They're just, like, they gave a respectful, like, distance, I guess. While they're all picnicking, the boys run off to chase a deer.
Because they're dogs, I guess.
Well, the dog stays behind because Hannah feeds some of her pie to their dog, who dies from eating it. The girls jump immediately to blaming Lucy. Jumping to conclusions here.
Hannah runs to the house and accuses Lucy of poisoning the pies. And then the head maid reveals that it was Julia who prepared the lunches, not Lucy.
Dun dun dun. Wait a second.
So Hannah confronts Julia, and Julia reveals that it's because she's jealous of Hannah and hates her.
So therefore, you must die. There's a fight between them, as you might expect. What you might not expect, though, is that Julia actually strangles Hannah until she thinks that Hannah's dead.
When Julia's distracted, Hannah smacks Julia with a shovel, and then she throws Julia in the coffin with the gardener.
I just want to think that this is kind of like the old Fear Street trope, right? Going back to some of the early books where you think somebody's dead and you don't bother to check for a pulse. I mean, I get it. This is the 1800s. Maybe people aren't as aware of these things, but this is like, it goes all the way to the beginning, folks.
Well, also, this kind of reminds me of The Stepsister.
Yeah.
Because it was also a shovel and a grave.
Yeah, but even the one where you have the gun goes off and shoots the guy, and they all think that he's dead, but he's not actually dead.
I mean, like you said, it's the 1800s. I don't know. They don't seem like very scientific people.
Listen, folks, if you're out there
murdering anybody, make sure you check the person's pulse.
Double tap. That's all you gotta do, just double tap.
Alright, anyway, so the funeral for the gardener happens, and Julia is buried along with the gardener.
Did we talk about how Hannah sticks Julia's body under the gardener's body or something like that? Did we talk about how disgusting that is? And like she just closes the coffin and goes like doop 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 doop.
And then she walks away, and she actually watches the funeral from afar because I guess no one in the family actually deems the gardener important enough to attend their funeral, but whatever. The people who are like lifting the coffin to put it into the ground, they have like a look of surprise, like, why is this thing so heavy?
Right. Yeah, because there's 2 people in there, buddy. So that night, Simon is like, yo, where's Julia? And he's like looking everywhere for her.
Which actually I found surprising.
Oh, because she's like the daughter he doesn't care about.
Yeah, and that he would actively like go searching by himself. He didn't say, hey family, let's form a search party. We need to find your sister. Like, this is really weird.
Well, his wife's like passed out from evil spirit overdose.
But it's just like, it didn't really match with the Simon that we've seen over the last few stories. As he walks by the cemetery, he hears screaming, and he digs up the coffin, but not in time. Julia's dead, and then if you look at the top of the coffin, there's actually claw marks all over it.
Yeah, so she wasn't dead when she got knocked out with a shovel. She just got knocked out, and then she got buried alive, and she woke up and started screaming, clawing, used up all her oxygen, and then asphyxiated.
So Simon runs home, and just as he's freaking out, he happens to look at the servants list. And then he sees the newest addition to it. Lucy Goode.
This is the point where Simon just completely loses his shit and goes totally nuts. He grabs a sword from his brand new Civil War collection, and we'll get back to this later, folks. And he runs throughout the house, waving the sword around, looking for Lucy. He's just got like that blood red rage mist in front of his eyes, I'm sure.
Well, he sees her. He sees her looking right at him, and he does the only reasonable thing in his mind. He stabs her in the chest with the sword.
Yeah. And then he realizes he stabbed Hannah in the chest.
Turns out Lucy Goode actually left because she was tired of being accused of everything bad happening in the house.
Because these people are honestly a bunch of nutsos. So if I was a servant, I would probably be like, okay.
It's not worth it.
Yeah, not really.
Now we flash forward, Shadyside Village, 1900.
Surprise, surprise, Simon Fier has never fully recovered from snapping and going crazy from Julia's death. Killing his own daughter did not make things better.
Who's surprised by that?
Yeah.
Well, Daniel Fier has been summoned to meet his grandparents for Simon's 75th birthday.
Yeah, so Daniel Fier has never been to Shadyside. He grew up in Massachusetts.
Boston. So when he's at the train station, he has to call a cab, and he has to be taken to Fier Mansion, and the cabbie's like, I'm just gonna call it a cab because it's our vernacular.
Mm-hmm.
But then the person taking him there is just like, no one's gone there since I've been doing this, and that place is creepy and weird.
Daniel's first encounter with his grandparents doesn't go all too well.
Angelica has had a psychotic break, and Simon is obsessed with the Fier lineage and keeping it going. Angelica is literally just screaming at him, telling him to put wood on the fire, telling him this, talking to people who aren't there.
Yeah, and Simon is concerned about the Fier legacy.
Yeah, he's screaming at Daniel about Joseph, Daniel's father, who's Simon's youngest son.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, he left when I told him that he should have stayed and been with his family. And, his brothers stayed, but they're dead. So, how dare Joseph leave and not obey me? And it's like...
Yeah, it sounds like he was better off leaving, but whatever. Simon decides that at this moment of their first meeting is a great opportunity to pass on the evil pendant. And he gives it to Daniel. As Daniel puts it on, he sees the flames and the death of Susanna Goode. The usual thing that everybody sees when they put it on.
And then Daniel is brought up to his guest room and spends the rest of the day miserable in Fier Mansion. And then the next day, he decides, I need to get out, and he goes to explore Shadyside. And then, as these stories always go, he sees the most beautiful girl ever and instantly falls in love.
Yeah, surprise, surprise. it turns out she's a Goode.
It's Nora Goode, and her family owns the general store in town.
She tells him about Shadyside and about Fear Mansion and like all the history of the local lore and stuff. And it's love at first sight. And he's smitten. He's just completely smitten.
And they hang out for, the next few days, and he's just more and more in love every day.
James Goode finds out that James Goode being Nora's father, finds out that Nora's been out with a Fier, and he forbids it.
Not because of any family feud, but because the Fiers have such an awful reputation in town. And he's like, no daughter of mine is going to be with that family. And he locks her in her bedroom.
Yeah, she's grounded. The Goodes have no, family recollection of any kind of weird curse thing. This is completely one-sided from Simon Fier's mind. We don't even know if these Goodes are even really related to those original Goodes. They might not be. Who knows? Daniel does some exploring in the Fier Mansion, and he finds a family tree dating back to Matthew and Benjamin back in 1692 in the family Bible.
The family housekeeper, the one person that stayed all these years, tells Daniel all about the Fier family curse.
And the history of the Fier family and the Goodes dating all the way back to Wickham, where the Fiers basically framed the Goodes for witchcraft and burned Susanna and her mother at the stake alive in front of the whole town. Daniel kind of sees what's going on here. If there is any kind of curse, the Fiers basically brought it upon themselves.
And then she tells Daniel that the only way to break the curse is if a Fier and a Goode marry.
Again, it's debatable whether or not there's actually any kind of curse at this point, aside from Simon Fier being completely crazy.
So Daniel runs to Nora the next day and breaks into her room. He tells her the story of their families, and the two of them decide that they're going to get married and they're going to break the curse. So Daniel gives her the family pendant to serve as their wedding ring. And as she puts it on, she also sees that flaming image and Susanna Goode and all that. They decide that they're going to announce their marriage at Simon Fier's 75th birthday party that night, which is maybe not the smartest idea.
As somebody that's been obsessed with the Goodes and this supposed curse for his entire adult life, probably not fantastic to do this on his 75th birthday.
Well, I don't think Daniel really knows the degree of Simon's obsessiveness, and because he's not spending any time with Simon or Angelica, he's spending all his time with Nora Goode. He doesn't actually know the full extent of,
how crazy they are.
How unraveled they are is what I was going to say, but fair enough.
Because they're so short-staffed, they actually had to bring in help from outside of town.
Because no one in town wants to be in Fear Mansion.
Right, and there's not enough servants to have, a big old party, so the housekeeper gets some helpers from elsewhere, and they prepare food and drink for the party.
But there are no guests.
But weirdly enough, Angelica is busy greeting empty space by the door. She's kind of going through the motions, even though...
Having conversations, shaking hands.
Yeah. Simon is staring at the doorway with a frozen smile on his face.
Daniel is kind of freaked out by his grandparents. Justifiably so, right?
Yeah, so anybody would be freaked out by this. This is, crazy.
This massive birthday cake that could feed a village is wheeled out for no one. And Daniel decides now's the right time to introduce them to Nora Goode.
Yeah, why not?
Simon reacts as anyone would expect.
He completely loses his mind and he tries to attack Nora as, oh my god, it's a Goode. I'm gonna stab with my Civil War sword.
But because he can't walk anymore, he ends up stumbling and knocking over his cake and some candles. And the entire room catches on fire.
Yeah. So Nora sees the ghost of all the people who have died in this trilogy kind of flash in front of her eyes. Susanna burning at the stake, which, blends in with the flames that are engulfing the dining room very quickly. She manages to run out into the woods, but everybody else is burned alive, including her fiancé.
And now we're back to Nora Goode writing her story. And hey, guess what? She's actually been locked up in an insane asylum because they think the fire and everything she had seen in the fire drove her mad. So she's writing the story to stop the evil. After burning out, the charred ruins of Fear Mansion and the evil legacy surrounding it will hover over the entire village. And she thinks that by writing this story out and letting everyone know, she can save the village from the evil. The nurses burn her story because they think she's crazy.
And they tell her that actually the village is building a road on the Fier property, and they're calling it Fear Street. Yeah, roll Fear Street Mythos music, right?
Fear Street mythos.
Wow, what a chilling ending to the series, though. That's actually kind of a classic horror movie ending, isn't it? Where, like, nobody believes the main character, and then they do the thing that exactly the main character would have not wanted them to do, knowing all that they know. It's kind of like the transition between Alien and Aliens, for example.
Or you could think of the ending between Goblet of Fire and Order of the Phoenix.
Exactly. So this is very classic storytelling motif. It's like, if we were actually really invested in this story, we'd be like yelling at the book, like, no, why don't you listen to her? But unfortunately, the book in large portions kind of lost us for a little bit there.
We'll get into that.
Yeah, we'll get into that. Let's start with the beginning. Dominatio per malum.
Power through evil.
Yeah.
Is what we're told it officially means.
Right, and that is the inscription on the evil pendant. I guess there's some questions here. I mean, like, how evil is it really? Because Angelica says, like, well, it's not that powerful. Actually, it was mostly my evil magic that killed all those people, not really your pendant.
Yeah, and even in the second story, it's her magic that allows them to be wealthy and well-regarded, like everything she's done. What has the pendant really brought the Fier family except heartbreak?
Right, that the pendant does seem to contain the memory of the flame, both past and future, and it communicates that memory to anybody that wears it, regardless of what time period they put it on. If we do assume that the green stone in the pendant is that same blue mineral that is found in a deposit underneath Fear Street, then we have ascribed some kind of time travel properties to it. So it kind of makes sense that that pendant can probably be used to see anything that happened to any wearer of the pendant or anybody that was near a wearer of the pendant at any point in history, if you know how to use it correctly. It's also kind of reminiscent of Lord of the Rings, where the Palantir that Denethor uses, which is the Palantir of Minas Tirith, after Denethor's death by fire, anybody who looks into that Palantir will only see flames. And it takes a very strong-willed individual to kind of bend that Palantir to their will and have it show anything other than just flames. That pendant's kind of the same way. It just sees those last dying moments of the Fier clan. Basically, anybody that puts it on is kind of just stuck seeing that. Maybe it's possible it lost a lot of its power because of that, and it takes somebody very skilled in dark arts to unlock all the other powers of it, because it's kind of just stuck in one gear. It's just stuck in this one gear of showing the fiery doom, and doesn't do much else unless you really know how to use it.
And I don't think the Fier family ever figure out how to really unlock it. I think, actually...
Well, the original one, Benjamin, right? Or his brother.
I was going to say, like, it seems like the Goods have better luck with it than the Fiers.
Right, well, the original Mr. Goodman Goode, he was a practitioner of the dark arts, although he had put them aside and tried to turn the leaf and become a good person.
I think you can practice the dark arts and be a good person.
Well, he didn't want to, right? He converted to whatever sect of Puritan Christianity that they were all following there. And he, like, for example, his carrots were terrible. And he knew, like, oh, well, if I cast this spell, my carrots would be great. But I won't do that. So whatever dark arts the Fiers possessed, I think by the time Simon comes around, that family lore has been lost. He can try to recover on his own. Maybe he can learn something from Angelica, his wife, but maybe he can't really unlock all the true powers of that amulet.
Maybe he should have given it to Angelica. You know, as his power through evil. She said she practiced the dark arts. She was evil. She was killing people. Maybe had she had it and was able to harness it, it'd be a different thing. But because Simon Fier thought it was him who was destined to have it, once she marries him, she becomes a Fier, right?
Yeah, well, you know what? Maybe it just had more to do with their marriage. You know, to be satisfied with her marriage, she needed to be with somebody that's evil.
I mean, he was evil, but he was not.
He had zero powers without that amulet, so maybe, like, the marital relationship wouldn't have been very good. That's why she let him keep it. I guess the one ironic thing is that despite all of the power through evil that the pendant supposedly imparts, the people using it, for example, Ezra and Simon, have been complete failures in terms of every instance of the curse in the second two books. With Ezra Fier and with Simon Fier has basically been a complete self-own. And
as soon as they buried the pendant, the family flourished.
Yeah, they don't need the pendant to be successful and happy and free of the curse.
Maybe it was just a mistranslation of Dominatio per malum. Like, maybe it's not power through evil. You know, maybe it's like...
suffering.
Right?
Stupidity.
It's like that scene from Event Horizon, which is my favorite thing ever. Like, they go on this ill-fated rescue mission because they only listened to part of that. And then when they actually, like, listen to the whole thing, it's like, oh, we should have listened to the whole thing before we went here. And maybe it's like part of the divinatio per malum thing got rubbed away.
Ex inferis.
Yes. Clearly, there's something wrong with this pendant.
Sure. I mean, anything that has, like, ominous-sounding Latin written on it.
Stay
you
away.
should know. Yeah, exactly. We've all seen enough movies to know to stay away from that shit.
And I think that Simon doesn't realize that, because if he had thought about for 1 minute, everything that went wrong with his family happened when his sister unearthed that pendant. Another thing I want to talk about is how the town version of what happened to the Fier daughters, that their bodies were found in the woods and their bones were removed and only their skin was found. And Angelica Fier is mad and evil, and people disappear in the woods behind Fier Mansion, and they're a result of Angelica's human sacrifices. It's very different from the Fier family that we encounter.
Sure.
And, we see what happened, what actually happened. It's very different from the town lore.
Well, for all we know, Angelica did have human sacrifices. We don't really touch on that in this story.
I mean, we do touch on the thing from the Cheerleader series about Sarah Fier and that storyline.
There's an interesting connection there, right? Because I know that your theory is that evil spirit was summoned by Angelica.
Well, I was going to go into that because we didn't talk about that yet.
I understand, but the thing that really connected it for me, and it actually just came to me while recording this episode, is that Angelica admits to murdering both James and Hamilton. If you look at the way James died, the way his body is controlled, he loses control of his body, and against his will, he climbs up. It's exactly described the same way as the victims are described as dying in the Cheerleader series. It's the exact same method.
So we should actually introduce the readers to this theory that I had talked to you before we had recorded.
Right.
It was basically, we were told that Angelica Fier, by the time they set up in Shadyside and they have all these kids, she's lost her ability to control her magic, her dark arts, her trances, her summonings. My theory is that the evil one that we saw in the Cheerleader trilogy was actually brought to the world by Angelica Fier, and maybe she was communicating with the evil one or doing something, or just trying to get it to help their family more, but she lost control and it escaped.
Yeah, and it fits perfectly because the way James dies is exactly the way that so many people die in the Cheerleader series. It has the same hallmark. So she may have been already kind of in communion with that evil spirit even back when she was a teenager. It may be something she summoned long ago and then just lost control of it over time.
Or maybe it's something that gained more power through the pendant that Simon was wearing.
Could be. Yeah, it could be like a joining of the two evils together. How do we fit this story in, though, in other regards, with the story of the cheerleaders? Because who was it was it Sarah Fier?
Yes.
And was she supposed to be a granddaughter of Simon? Or a daughter?
Daughter-in-law.
Daughter-in-law.
Granddaughter-in-law, right?
The granddaughter-in-law, Sarah Fier, is supposed to die Actually, I guess her death takes place just a year before Nora Goode shows up and the mansion burns down. Depending on which version of the story, because I think in the second Cheerleader's book, they say it's 1900, but in the first one, they say it's 1899.
It was 1898, 1889. They kept switching it.
But anyways, this is all kind of collapsing. You can tell that in the 1860s, Angelica is already starting to lose control. She's having these fainting spells. And then by the late 1800s, the 1890s, the 1900, right when she dies, she's completely entered full-blown dementia, has no control of this evil spirit. This has already resulted in the deaths of, for sure we know, her granddaughter-in-law, but probably also her grandson, and who knows who else.
I don't think she had necessarily had dementia. I would say that maybe she was just stuck in the other realm. She had a foot in both worlds. She sees dead people, i.e. the Sixth Sense.
Yeah, but she had no power. The spirit had been unleashed, basically. She had no power over it.
Right, I don't think she had control over it. I think they all became I think she unleashed Pandora's box.
Yeah. The other possibility is that we know that Sarah Fier became possessed by the spirit in a near-death experience. And it may be that Angelica tried to use the power of the spirit to kind of bring her granddaughter-in-law back to health, but instead ended up providing her granddaughter-in-law as an outlet for that evil spirit to possess a physical body and gain a physical presence in the world, like an oops, basically.
Or it could be just the energy that she harnesses along with the pendant that Simon Fier wears. Yeah. It could be amplifying the energy of the ghost to allow them, or the spirits, to allow them to take over bodies like they did Sarah Fier's when she was at her most vulnerable. And she doesn't have the magical ability of Angelica or whatever the pendant gives. And so she was more susceptible to being taken over. You could argue that Julia's meltdown could be attributed to some kind of evil spirit as well, some evil energy. I mean, it seems like she was the more susceptible to whatever was going on.
Sure, yeah, and that could be attributed to that. And who knows, maybe she actually did die when she got smacked in the head by that shovel. And that was her reanimated corpse clawing at the coffin. And then she died a second time. You know, we don't know exactly what went down. Maybe her dead body became reanimated with the evil spirit because it was buried in the ground in the midst of the freaking mineral deposit that we've been talking about this whole time. That Fier family cemetery, like, how long have they been digging there? Is the family cemetery, quote unquote, just an excuse for an early attempt at the extraction of the mineral?
We are told that the Fier family is really rich and wealthy and influential in 1865, but we're never told why.
Mm-hmm.
We're just told that, well, they made a lot of money. I guess those will tie in with 1800s things, but they basically shoot to their place in society during and after, like during the Civil War. It doesn't seem like Simon Fier's doing any industry type things, which was the big thing that would get you rich in Massachusetts. So that's why I'm going back to Ohio. The sort of nothing that his family seems to be doing, maybe the mining type things or the ore or the weird deposits, the mineral deposits, that works a lot better with our Ohio theory than our Massachusetts theory.
Well, also, you're not going to get wealthy living in the South during or after the Civil War because they lost.
I mean, we are told about, like, the autumnal days and how it was an Indian summer. So we are given that it has to be someplace where the weather changes and you have, like, an autumn. And it's probably not going to be in the Ozarks or Appalachia because of the Civil War.
You know what's really interesting, actually? It keeps going back to Ohio, but the other place they keep mentioning is Massachusetts. For example, Daniel Fier is from Boston, and the Fier family has its roots in the Massachusetts colony. Before we read the saga, we always suspected, like, hey, maybe there's a Shadyside B site in Massachusetts, because every once in a while, whichever Fear Street book we were reading at the time would make it seem like, for this particular book, it makes it really seem like Shadyside might be Massachusetts. Like, about 10% of the books were like that.
Well, it makes sense that there would be a Fier family, because Joseph's family is in Boston. Yeah. They are in Massachusetts. On top of that, they didn't have that stupid pendant. They're obviously going to be doing a lot better than the Fiers in Ohio. It does make sense that there are two Fier clans.
Yeah.
The one that we read in Party Summer is probably the offshoot of Joseph Fier.
Exactly. Yeah, they did well for themselves because they didn't get mixed up in all the evil. The whole Massachusetts connection, like, really becomes explained in this book. We always suspected there was a Massachusetts connection, but we weren't quite sure what it was exactly. And it's starting to come into, like, sharp relief as we're reading the saga here. But the Ohio roots are very strong, too, because where's the first place the Fiers go after they get kicked out of Massachusetts? Well, they go to the Pennsylvania frontier. And Pennsylvania and Virginia both controlled portions of eastern Ohio at the time that was basically known as the Pennsylvania frontier.
Back in the mid-1800s, when Simon and Angelica were coming up through the ranks, it would be a lot easier to establish themselves where they want to be in society in a place like Ohio rather than Massachusetts.
Yeah, and do a little bit of war profiteering on the side, because, you know, why not?
Oh, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, let's talk about his war memorabilia collection.
Okay, yes, this is a nitpick. So, first of all, he keeps calling, and not even he, the narrator, so R.L. Stine, keeps writing it as the war between the states. First of all, they're northerners. It's said explicitly that Simon Fier is a northerner.
Yep.
A few times. And
he's from Massachusetts.
He's in either Ohio or Massachusetts if you don't buy into our theories, right? That phrase, war between the states, wasn't used until like a few years after the war. So this story takes place in 1865, probably August or September. The war ended in May of 1865. So no one's calling it the war between the states. Second of all, that term was used mostly by people from the South as a way to make it seem
less bad.
To put themselves in a slightly better light and not as secessionist or whatever.
Yeah, it's
you
kind of
like
the many sides argument. You know, there's many states.
Part 2 is that during his dinner party, he has people looking at the weapons and uniforms from the war between the states. Now, this was called the war between brothers for a reason. if they're living, it doesn't matter if it's Massachusetts or Ohio, does anyone think that 3 or 4 months after this really bloody conflict between families, between friends, between neighbors,
and everybody knows someone that died.
Everyone knows someone who's died. This is like an intense conflict that has been going on for like a few years.
This is the bloodiest war in American history. Still to this day.
But for them, it's like very fresh in their mind. Does anyone think like 3 or 4 months later, people would be oohing and eyeing things from this war? And also, where are you getting these weapons?
Well, here's what I was thinking, is if he's doing, like, war profiteering, maybe he's involved in, like, shipping war material to the front lines, so he would have uniforms and weapons and stuff that you can just skim off the top, keep a little example of each thing that he ships out. Maybe he was trying to sell these to the Union Army, and so he had, like, examples to show, like, the Union Army purchasers, like, this is the uniform I'd like to sell you. I have 100 more like this one. Or try out this sword.
But I can
furnish 1,000 swords like this.
But even so, would people be oohing and eyeing this 3 months later?
Yeah, no, they wouldn't. It doesn't make any sense. The whole Civil War memorabilia collection thing makes a lot more sense in the 1900s than it does in 1865.
3 months after the war.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons I decided that he was in Ohio is that I looked at the roles that different states played during the war. For Massachusetts, what it became during the war and afterwards was like a heavily industrial state. And it was just the war industry really came out of Massachusetts. Everything we had read about the Fiers or learned about them, it didn't really fit in with that specifically.
Right, you never hear about the Fear Factory. Although that sounds like a name for a R.L. Stein book, if I ever heard one.
Yeah, I was just going to say, is that another, like, trilogy we have to read? The Fear Factory? But, yeah, so we've launched straight into nitpicks.
Yeah, you also had one about the waltz, right?
So, it's 1845, and I think it was, like, either James or Hamilton, one of the suitors, asked Angelica if their father's going to let the orchestra or quartet or whatever the hell was playing, if that they were going to play that new fandangled song that was just coming over. And she was just aghast, like, my father would never let that devilry be played in our house. Mm-hmm. How can you even say that? And they're talking about the waltz. It may have been kind of a new dance in the 1800s, but it had made its way stateside by the 1830s, especially in high society. We're told that this is like the highest of New Orleans high society. And by 1845, they would have had the waltz. It might not have been the really amazing waltzes, you know, the waltz kings were still like composing their songs, but they would have had the waltz, and it wouldn't have been this like new thing that, oh, have you heard of it? That was also like a nitpick I had.
So another thing is that during the fire at the end of the book, one of the ghosts that Nora sees is Abigail Goode, except that Abigail was a Fier. And that's yet another pretty glaring error on R.L. Stein's part. Kind of like mixing up years and other issues that he's had in the past with these books.
I think my theory for this is that when you're reading the list of everyone that Nora Goode sees, you know, it says their full name, like Kate Fier and Susanna Goode. There's like 2 Goodes and then just a list of Fiers. And if you read it like that, it really just does seem like pretty pathetic.
Yeah, well,
so maybe he was just like,
he wanted to even the score a little bit.
Yeah, he must have been like, this can't be right. There had to have been more Goodes.
He kind of, at the end of his final chapter, he realizes that he screwed up the curse, and it's basically a self-own on the Fiers.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Because, like, I was looking at it like, it's just a list of Fiers. And then it's like, if you change that one name of Abigail Goode, and then you mention, I think he was like Abigail Goode and her mother or something, then all of a sudden it looks like there's more Goodes on this list. But actually, no, it was literally just Susanna and her mother.
It sounds like Goodman Goode really got his revenge in the end. He pretty much wiped out generation upon generation of Fiers, stretching like forward like 200 years.
It all started because Goodman Goode saw the pendant.
Yep. If you hadn't seen that pendant, if that pendant hadn't like sort of slipped out of, you know, Benjamin Fier's, or I forgot which one of the brothers it was, shirt, he would have never like put 2 and 2 together.
But no, it was worse for the Fiers in the end that it popped out.
You know, the other thing is that if they had actually gone through with their deal, given him his wife and daughter back in exchange for all of his money, he would have probably let it go. It's the fact that they took his money and killed his family anyway.
Yeah, it was still on the Fiers in the end.
100%. But the funny thing is that, like, after Goodman Goode gets his initial revenge way back in the first book. They keep bringing it on themselves. If they had just buried the pendant forever and just forgotten all about this nonsense, they would have been fine. Just put it to rest. Like, call it even and just move on. They would have been okay.
It's like, I think it's them ascribing something special to the pendant that does more than anything else. Granted, I do think there is something unique about the pendant, because every time someone puts it on, they see flames and, like, Susanna Goode. So obviously there's something there. But the fact that they're seeing Susanna Goode says something more, because it's not a fear that they're seeing. They're seeing the Goodes. It's the Goodes' revenge. So is it power through evil? Like, the Goodes have cursed the Fiers, and that's like just an old family curse that was put on the Fiers or something that goes through the pendant. So as soon as the pendant comes out, that curse comes. But if you don't have that pendant, then there's nothing there, because, like, the soul of Susanna Goode and her mother are trapped within the pendant.
One other thing that I wanted to mention, this is going to be for Patreon users only or something like that, because we cannot publicly air this, but this theory just came to my mind.
Anyways, so if you're a Patreon user, you're going to enjoy that little tidbit that I had just cut.
Whenever we get a Patreon.
Going off from your Patreon theory, I will say that maybe the mineral just brings out the worst in people. And that's something that we have seen, that we've commented on in all the other Fear Street books, is that it brings out the most paranoid, or the most neurotic, or it brings out the worst. Their most, their innermost fears, or...
Yeah, it brings out the worst in men. For example, if we're looking at Simon Fier, it does nothing but amplify his mediocrity.
But blinds him to his own mediocrity.
Exactly.
The one thing that I would say is that I do think the blue stone and the blue mineral, it does amplify the worst in people. And that is something we've seen consistently in every single Fear Street book. And I think it clouds your judgment to a degree as well.
Absolutely. Do we find out where the pendant went at the end?
We assume it's with Nora Goode.
We don't know for sure, right? We really don't know where it is.
I don't have the book with me anymore, but I think in the first of the trilogy she has it. When she's writing her story.
Now it's what? In the clutches of the corporation, in like a research lab somewhere with a bunch of wires and electrodes coming out of it, powering their like central supercomputer.
Yeah, I could see exactly that happening to the pendant. But can we talk about how she's locked in an insane asylum and she's writing this story out?
Yeah, I mean, it's very Terminator, isn't it? In fact, seems just like Sarah Connor from the Terminator movie. There's like a little time travel element in there too. It's kind of interesting.
So the Fiers are like the Connors.
Yeah, or the Goodes. I don't know. I'm not sure which one.
So maybe the Fiers are the Terminators and the Goodes are the Connors?
Yeah, something like that.
How much of it is she a reliable narrator is the question.
No, absolutely not.
So how much of the story is everything you hear about the Goodes is now you realize like they're not so bad, but because we're hearing it from Nora Goode's point of view. The Fiers seem extra dumb. We keep talking about how, like, it's all self-owned. They bring it on themselves. Dumbest protagonists or antagonists, depending on how you look at it, that we've seen in these Fear Street books. Is it because it's being written by Nora Goode?
Is this just yet another version of the story, and we will never truly know the full truth? Just like all of the local legends we've heard up till now have just been like kind of shadows of the truth. Maybe those are not really just shadows, but like different aspects or different viewpoints coming at it from a different angle. Just like her version of the story is just another version coming at it from yet another angle. And unless we somehow uncover Simon Fier's secret diary, which somehow survived the fire, we'll never really know.
I think that's one of the most disappointing things of this series for me, this trilogy, is that it's from the point of view of someone who's been told the story in like a frenzied evening. She heard the story from Daniel Fier, who heard the story from the maid.
Doesn't she also see all of it in a vision through the amulet as well? Although that could, be fueled by madness. That could be.
Well, if you think about it, maybe that's why he wrote Abigail Goode. Maybe when she saw it, it was, like, confusing for her. It's just so hard to tell.
Isn't Abigail Goode the one that came to their house?
Abigail came to my house.
There you go. So she came to their house.
Oh, so she became a Goode.
Yeah. Yeah, she came to the house of Goode. That's one way of looking at it. Maybe we were a little too harsh on Mr. Stein. Maybe he's, like, playing a 3D chess over here, and we're just not seeing half the boards.
I mean, it was also the choice of names that he chose for them, right?
Yeah.
The Goodes versus the Fiers.
Yeah, I mean, the Goodes were not completely innocent in all of this.
I mean, there was one instance of Hammurabi's code, but...
Yes, there was. And then there was that crazy vagrant guy that I'm not sure if he was really a good or just a figment of the freaking pendant. He could have just been, like, conjured up by the pendant as this apparition, basically. We don't really know.
But the thing is, we're told everything that the maid tells Daniel Fear. Yeah. And then he has to, like, retell all of that to Nora Goode.
Mm-hmm.
But, like...
Well, the maid probably heard everything from Simon, right?
He's a bit, biased. So my point is, like, she's not a very reliable narrator. I think
he heard everything from, like, the town witch, by the way.
And also the crazy dude that showed up at his doorstep and, like, killed his entire family.
Oh my god. Yeah, so, like, nobody really knows what exactly happened.
So I think my biggest disappointment in this saga is that none of it is reliable.
I think my biggest disappointment is how poorly written it is. The second two books were really boring. The plot lines were, like, super generic. The family feud wasn't really much of a feud at all. And also, really great plot points were completely missed. What about the Revolutionary War? What about the Civil War? What about the War of 1812? Great backdrops for really cool stories. You could have had so many different things going on, and instead it was just mediocrity all the way through. The first book was basically the highlight of the entire series, and then everything else kind of just slid into this slurry of sadness and disappointment.
Tell us how you really feel. Before we get into, like, how we feel, I guess 1800s things would be a brief mention of the war between the states, as he calls it, even though they called it the Civil War. They literally called it the Civil War back then. And
they also mentioned horseless carriages, or as we know them, automobiles. And those indeed, made their first appearance in the late 1800s. And if you're in Ohio or Boston, you would have seen them because they were made in industrial states like that and they would have been around.
Let's talk about how we actually felt about the book for real. My thing was, Simon Fier is such a mediocre male. Like, everything about him is just everything wrong with not men, but men.
Well, yeah, he's got this stupid, like, nice guy thing going on. And I mean that in the worst way possible. He's basically this toxic male. The scene where he's in the party and his internal, like, thoughts are absolutely despicable. He basically sees every other person in the room as, like, just something to be exploited. He has no capacity for empathy or, compassion, and it's really despicable.
And he thinks he's fantastic and great and the best person there, but he has nothing to back it up. Like, he has so much ego, but there's no reason he should. And it's confounding.
Right, and then it turns out that he's not even, like, as evil as he thinks he is, because it's actually Angelica who's doing all the stuff. That's the other part, right? I get that R.L. Stine wants it to be a surprise that Angelica Pierce dabbles in the dark arts, but it comes absolutely out of left field and is just laughable. And then they toast with blood at the end. Like, it falls, like, totally flat. Or at least for me.
Yeah, it comes from nowhere. Like, remember in our interview with Edgar, he says, I think he was talking about Deus Ex Machinas. He's like, people complain about them, but it's just that the readers weren't noticing it. So I actually read this book more than once because I had to do the outline. There was literally nothing about it. There was no hints. There was absolutely nothing. And it's one thing to, like, want to surprise your readers. But it's another thing to make something that big come out of nowhere. Because you do follow Angelica for a large part of that first story, and there's nothing about it. And that's just bad writing. That's such bad writing.
Yeah, just drop a little hint. This is the kind of thing that we've been telling Joe Hill about for as long as this podcast's been around. And come on, R.L. Stine, you know better than this. We hammer Joe Hill about his over-the-head foreshadowing, but you know what? A little bit, just a pinch here and there, actually goes a long way. Yeah, you could dump in the entire salt shaker of foreshadowing, like, spoil the broth. Or you could add none at all and make it completely unpalatable also. You gotta just add that pinch.
Be at the Salt Bay. The part where they're toasting with blood. What blood are they toasting with?
Animal I love
blood?
The part
Human
where
blood?
Simon takes a sip and he's like, this isn't wine. It's like, dude, blood has such a strong odor. You would smell it, like, just wafting out of there long before you even raise it to your lips. Are you freaking kidding me?
And even though it was sort of like a joking, it's not wine, is it? It's like, Come on, guys. He wasn't even that kind of evil. That's the thing. Like, he didn't even know that the power that his little pendant held before he burned that dude's face. Even before he burned the dude's face, he had this, like, weird, misplaced arrogance.
Yeah.
That came from nowhere. And even after he knew what the pendant could do, like, it still didn't make any sense.
Right, so how many bloody paddle wheels out of 5 would you give this book?
It's on a Fear Street scale. It's better than the last book. I will give it that.
Yes.
I think it's better than the last book.
What did I give the last one? Like a negative something?
I think 0.
Oh my god.
It was bad.
We almost quit? I'm pretty sure we almost quit.
I'm on a Fear Street scale. I'll give it like a 1.5 rounds to 2. It was better than the last book.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it half a paddle wheel. Hamilton's body got caught in there and just broke half the fins off, and now it's just like the paddle wheeler boat is just spinning around in a circle because it's got nowhere to go because one of its wheels is broken. Kind of like the plot in this book.
Oh yeah, one more thing I wanted to mention. So another like 1800s thing is the paddle wheel boat. So you can actually still take a paddle wheel boat ride from New Orleans to Memphis. It costs like $3,000.
If you're a descendant of the Fiers, you could probably easily afford.
Yeah, but it's still a trip that's like going on now, and I guess you could follow Aunt Lavinia, or whatever her name was.
Yeah, or Hamilton, just jump in there. Not advocate doing that, but...
No, don't do that. Don't jump in there. Bad idea. Don't throw anyone in there if you have
Actually, I think nowadays the paddle wheeler boats have like nice little safety covers over the top so you can't actually fall into the wheel.
I looked at a picture of one. They don't.
They don't? The wheel's just wide open?
Not the picture that I saw.
Oh my god.
So...
You'd think they just put like a little, like a little cover over it.
But you think if you put a cover, someone who gets caught underneath...
Oh, so which way's less safe?
I think they're just stay away from it.
Okay.
Just don't go near it. It's very easy, very simple.
Yeah, true that.
Yeah, so I think 1.5, maybe, I don't even know. Because it rounds to 2, maybe 1.49.
There you go.
Rounds down to 1. But I'll give it a firm 1.49.
I mean, it's important, right? If you're really dedicated to the Fear Street series, then you have to read the saga.
Because
so from that standpoint, it's important.
It does give you insight that's different from the stories, the tall tales that were told about the Fiers. Now you know how pathetic the Fiers are. And I think that adds to the whole story. I really think that our Fear Street mythos, I really think about it, I think the Goodes run the corporation.
It makes sense to me.
They have the pendant. They know what the blue clay does. And they are going with the family tradition.
If they're not the Goodes, then at least they have somehow been associated with the Goodes. And I do think they have their hands on the pendant. I do believe that.
Nora Goode's father is still alive, and he's not happy with what the Fiers have done and all that. So I'm sure to get his revenge. I mean, he ran the general store, so he knows everyone, because everyone goes into the general store.
Sure.
Even if it's not run by the Goodes, I do think like the Goodes have a role in it.
What is the new Sarah Fier doing in town? Slinking around. Remember in the cheerleaders series? One of the Fiers was slinking around town.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Well, I think they want to figure out a way to get their family back into the good graces or profit from the whole Fier industry within the town.
Well, how much of Fear Street do they actually still own? For all you know, like a lot of those houses are just leasing Fier land. Don't actually own it.
That could be true. I know that is a good theory. That all went to Joseph, right? So they have the whole Massachusetts colony and the Shady Side Fear Street thing. I mean, they don't want to give up that blue clay either, right?
Yeah, I mean, if Joseph even knew about it, he might have just developed the property to make money.
They were a smart family without the pendant. Maybe he's doing everything not even knowing what he's on.
Right,
And
it's a generational thing. So, like, some future generation of the Fiers suddenly, like, wakes up and realizes they're evil. Whereas, Joseph was not necessarily that. He might have been, like, one of the good apples, so to speak.
Or it could be, like, a familial hereditary thing, because remember what happened to the Fier in Party Summer, and he was hunting humans.
Yeah.
I don't know.
He had a little bit of Angelica in him.
Alright, are we done talking about this book?
Yes, and we're done talking about this saga, at least for now. Let's talk about the next book in the Fear Street series, finally getting back to Shady Side.
I mean, we were back in Shady Side. We're getting back to 1990s Shady Side.
Back to the 90s. The entire raison d'etre for this podcast is to get back into the 90s groove and revisit some of that pop culture.
We're going to do Fear Street The Dare.
Some girls will do anything for a guy, even kill.
It's a teenage guy and a teenage girl in a car. The guy is driving, and they look pretty surprised at whatever's on the road ahead of them. And the girl, actually, she looks more like she's in awe of whatever's ahead. And they're dressed like what an adult would think a teenager dressed like in the 90s. They're dressed exactly like the characters in Buffy. Not the actual character, like the side characters in Buffy.
She's wearing a leather jacket, and he's wearing a leather coat with a fur collar.
They're dressed like teenagers in the 90s as drawn by an adult.
She's got 80s hair though. Look at that big hair.
She does have 80s hair. He's got 90s hair. He's got
She's got boy band hair.
Yes.
She might be surprised because if you look at the picture, she is startled into being slightly cross-eyed. So she's got this big O face. Eyes are just totally crossing.
Maybe there's a bug in front of her face and they're trying to kill the bug in the car. And that's the dare. Can you kill the bug in the car, without crashing the car? I've actually tried doing that once. I was driving someone and we were on the highway and it was my old car. You had to roll down the windows with the handles. There was this bug in the car. I had to roll down my window. I was trying to swat the bug out of the car to the point where I wasn't even looking at the road. I had no hands on the wheel. And the passenger sort of looked at me and went do you want me to hold the wheel while you do this? Or are you going to drive? And I was oh, yeah. So maybe that's the dare.
You see some headlights behind them.
So Serge has already read the book,
yeah.
FYI.
I pre-recorded my predictions, which I will now paraphrase, because I recorded them on my phone.
And he's going to cheat because he's not going to say exactly what he said, so he's going to change the nuance of everything.
I'm not going to change it. My predictions were... I'm not going to say how accurate they were, but I'm going to tell you what they were. The other thing I wanted to mention is that they're sitting in one of those cars that has the giant front seat all the way across.
Is
with
that
no
relevant
center
to the
console
story?
and a column shifter. My idea was that it's going to be a female murder, and the murder weapon's going to be a little complicated. So my idea was that they're going to run somebody over, and then she's going to actually try to cover up the fact of this hit and run by kind of disposing of the body. And it's going to turn out that the person was actually still alive, but they didn't know that the person was alive. The murder ends up being the other thing, not the initial hit and run, which I feel is a common theme in these Fear Street books. We just read a book where somebody got knocked over the head with a shovel, but actually died of asphyxiation inside the coffin. There's going to be something like that. So there's a dare of some sort to kill somebody, and then they end up running this person over with a car, I guess. Anyway, that's my prediction. How's your prediction, Anna?
So you basically just gave the plot of I Know What You Did Last Summer.
Really? Oh, I haven't seen that movie.
And it was also a plot of an episode of Black Mirror.
Okay.
My prediction is based on the idea that this cover is full of crap and plays no role in what's going to happen. My thing is a guy dares a girl to kill another girl as a prank, and because Shadyside kids are infinitely dumb, she agrees. They're in a car, and I bet we're supposed to think that she runs the person over, but it's probably something really boring, like stabbing with a knife or shooting with a gun or just something generic. I think it's probably actually done by the guy who dared her. I think that's all I have to predict.
Predictions locked. All right.
Don't forget to keep your eyes open on that Gentleman's Guide of Vice and Virtue giveaway that we're going to be doing.
And it's a signed book made out to the RetRead fam. I don't think it actually says that. Mackenzi Lee would never write something atrocious like that, but it's a very nice signature. We might put up a picture of what she actually wrote in there. It's very kind of her to autograph that for us. Yeah, we look forward to coming back with another episode real soon when we review Fear Street, The Dare.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Bye. We hope you enjoyed this episode of RetRead Podcast.
Join us again as we continue our journey down Fear Street.
We love hearing from you guys, so feel free to reach out to us at RetRead Podcast on Twitter and Facebook.
Email us at ret.read.podcast@gmail.com.
Don't forget to like, rate, and subscribe.
Once again, thanks for listening. See you again soon.